Like a garden snail leaves a trail behind, a story snail leaves a tail behind. Share our stories and you may find you can tell a story too.
Well, hi everyone! I'm really glad to be with you today because today is the International Day of Peace. A few years ago, pretty much every single country in the world came together and decided that every single 21st of September would be the International Day of Peace. A day when all of those countries would think really hard and work really hard to find ways to make the world a more peaceful place. But I wonder what they actually meant by that. I mean, people have lots of different ideas for what peace is, don't they? Some people think that peace means being really quiet. Other people think that peace means being really safe. And yet more people think that peace just means not fighting anymore. I wonder what peace means to you. People have been thinking about what peace means for a very long time, almost as long a time as this next story that I'm about to tell you has been around. You see, this story is very old, so old that we've completely forgotten where it comes from or who made it up. But I think it's a story that could give us a really good idea about what peace actually is. It's a story about two neighbours, one called Neighbour Nell and one called Neighbour Nick. And these two neighbours were the best of friends. They did everything together. For example, Neighbour Nell and Neighbour Nick would go rock climbing together. Can you do that? Send your Neighbour Nick and Neighbour Nell rock climbing. Of course, rock climbing can be quite dangerous. It would be very easy for one of them to slip. But if that did happen, the other one would be there to save them and catch them. They were the best of friends. They really did everything together, like they would eat together. Can you get your Neighbour Nell and Neighbour Nick eating together? And of course that gave them the energy to go rock climbing. But if they wanted to eat, they needed to work really hard because both Neighbour Nell and Neighbour Nick were farmers. They had to grow their own food, so they would work together. Working together was a really good thing to do because that way they could share water and they could share seeds and they would grow lots of good food to eat. Is your Neighbour Nell and your Neighbour Nick working together too? But working on the land was a really hard job, so both Neighbour Nell and Neighbour Nick needed to be as strong as they possibly could. So to help each other build up their muscles, they would often do some wrestling. See if you can get your Neighbour Nell and your Neighbour Nick to have a bit of an arm wrestle, just like that. But of course, if you're going to wrestle each other, you also need to be able to trust each other. And that's one of the reasons why Nell and Nick really enjoyed rock climbing. Because if you're rock climbing, you need to trust each other. So if one of you slips, the other one of you can be right there to catch you. However, at the start of this story, Neighbour Nell had got really hungry a little bit before dinner time. So she started eating by herself. And when Neighbour Nick came round to join her for dinner, well, he was too late. She'd already eaten all she could. Neighbour Nick got a little bit surprised by this, and he said to Nell, "We do everything together. Why didn't you wait for me?" And Nell said, "Well, I was hungry. I couldn't wait for you." Nick said, "You should have waited for me." Nell said, "Well, you should be more thoughtful." And they got into such a big argument that both of them turned away from each other. Well, of course, it wasn't long before Nell was going out to do her work. But Nick needed to have dinner. Can you get your Neighbour Nell working while your Neighbour Nick is eating? And later on, Nell went round to see if Nick would be happy to do some wrestling, but she found he wasn't, because he was working. And now it seemed they couldn't do anything together, because whenever Nell was eating, Nick was working. And whenever Nick was eating, Nell was working. And of course that meant that the work began getting extra hard, partly because they weren't wrestling anymore, so they weren't building up their strength, and partly because they weren't working together anymore, so they couldn't be sharing their seeds or their water. But still, they were so angry with each other that they did not want to even try to make up. One day, Nick went out to do a bit of rock climbing, all by himself. But before he got too high, he realised it was actually quite dangerous to do that by yourself. He decided he needed a new hobby, so he took up singing. Singing really loudly. So loudly that it annoyed Nell. She doesn't look very happy, does she? Does your Nell look happy? Of course, I think Nick was doing this on purpose. I think he was deliberately trying to make Nell upset. But Nell wasn't having any of it. She went and she started digging by the river. She dug a huge ditch right between their houses. And all the water from the river rushed down into that ditch, making such a lovely rolling water noise that now Nell couldn't even hear Nick singing. And while he was singing as loudly as he could, she was able to just go into her garden and lie there and relax. Well, of course, that got Nick really, really angry. He had wanted to really frustrate Nell, and seeing her looking so calm and happy made his blood boil. Just then, a carpenter was walking down the road. And so Nick rushed over to the carpenter and said, "Hey, I want you to do something for me. My neighbour and I used to be friends, but one day she decided to do something without me, and, well, now we don't do anything together. In fact, now she is trying to annoy me as much as possible by making all of that water rush down and create such a big noise that it gets in the way of my singing. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to build a big fence so that I don't even have to look at her face anymore. Can you give me what I need?" And the carpenter thought for a moment and then said, "Yes, I can give you what you need. I will start work on it now, I'll complete it overnight, and it will be there for you in the morning." Well, Nick was quite happy with that, and off he went to bed. And the following morning, when he woke up, he was really excited about the fence that would now be blocking off the sight of that river and the sight of Nell's face. He rushed out into his garden, and as he looked, he found himself with this look on his face. Because there was no fence. Instead, the carpenter had built a bridge over that river. A bridge that meant Nell would be able to come over to his land whenever she liked. That made Nick so angry. He wasn't just angry with Nell anymore, he was angry with that carpenter as well, and he started rushing to the end of the garden to tell him what for. But as he was rushing, he spotted Nell coming over the bridge, and she had her arms out wide. And she was calling to Nick, saying, "Oh, my friend, I am so sorry. There I was, doing things by myself, and doing really mean things like digging a ditch between us. But you clearly want to be friends again, otherwise you wouldn't have built this bridge, and it's made me realise how silly I am. I am so sorry. But I want you to know as well, I forgive you for all of the horrible things you did, like working without me and singing really loudly." Well, when Nick heard that, he realised that actually he did want Nell to be his friend again. So he went over to her and they had a huge hug. And the best way that you can show that your Nell and your Nick are having a hug is to have a handshake. It's actually quite difficult to shake your own hands, isn't it? So I tell you what, maybe see if there's a Nell or a Nick either side of you and shake their hands instead. As for the carpenter, well, he snuck off, maybe to go building bridges somewhere else. Well, I wonder what you think that story says about peace. Was peace all about being quiet? I know there wasn't much quietness in that story, was there? Was peace about being safe? I don't know, because both Nell and Nick like doing their rock climbing, and they were happy doing that, even though it could sometimes not be quite so safe. Is peace about not fighting anymore? I don't know, because again, Nell and Nick liked doing their wrestling together, didn't they? A bit of competition seemed to be good to help them build up their strength. So I wonder what you think that story teaches us about peace. Maybe you can have a chat with your friends and your teachers and your grown-ups back at home. And if you have any really good ideas, please do send them to us. If you give your ideas to your teachers, I'm sure they'll be able to figure out how they can get your ideas to us here at Snail Tales. Right now though, it only remains for me to say cheerio, and I hope to hear your story soon. So, cheerio, and I hope to hear your story soon.